the question that never sleeps. Every sustained philosophical inquiry begins with a question. That question functions not simply as a request for information, but as an orientation that determines how thought proceeds. Questions distinguish reflective agents from mere information processors. They convert lived experience into topics for examination and enable abstraction, comparison, and evaluation. To ask is to create epistemic space in which doubt, testing, and potential revision can occur. The history of philosophy illustrates the multiple roles that questioning plays. Socratic interrogation pursued clarity by exposing implicit assumptions and examining their consequences in dialogue. René Descartes introduced methodological doubt as a way of identifying beliefs that withstand rigorous scrutiny and of reconstructing knowledge on firmer premises. Existential and phenomenological thinkers directed attention to questions about meaning, embodiment, and authenticity, treating inquiry as an orientation toward life rather than a purely technical procedure. Contemporary philosophers continue to debate methods of questioning while recognizing its central role in sustaining critical reflection. From a cognitive perspective, questioning engages metacognitive mechanisms. When an agent inspects its beliefs or reasoning processes, monitoring and control procedures are activated that support error detection and belief revision. Different types of questions perform distinct epistemic functions. Empirical questions guide observation and the collection of data. Conceptual questions clarify categories, definitions, and the relations among concepts. Normative questions evaluate reasons, values, and obligations. The interaction among these kinds of questions can generate complex patterns of theoretical development and practical deliberation. Questioning also operates within social and institutional contexts. In dialogical settings, questions invite response and create expectations of justification. Educational, legal, and scientific institutions embody particular norms about which questions are appropriate and about how answers should be produced and assessed. Such norms influence the distribution of epistemic authority and shape which concerns become central in public discourse. The framing of questions, the authority to pose them, and the standards for acceptable answers all affect what can be investigated and why. To question is to acknowledge uncertainty without surrendering agency. Recognizing uncertainty need not produce paralysis. It can motivate careful analysis, iterative testing, and calibrated confidence. Sustained, disciplined questioning functions as a safeguard against premature closure and as a mechanism for ongoing improvement. The persistence of a question can itself be epistemically valuable because it indicates that current formulations remain provisional and may be revised in light of further evidence, argument, or reflection. The paradox of knowing. The relationship between knowledge and doubt presents one of the most enduring paradoxes in philosophy. Knowledge is conventionally regarded as a form of mastery or control over reality, a means of replacing uncertainty with understanding. Yet, as intellectual inquiry advances, it often generates not stability, but new questions. The acquisition of knowledge exposes the complexity of systems once thought simple, revealing additional layers of contingency, ambiguity, and interdependence. The more one learns, the more one recognizes the limits of what can be known. This phenomenon characterizes the paradox of knowing, that the pursuit often leads to an expanded awareness of ignorance. In this sense, doubt is not opposed to knowledge, but is intrinsic to its development. It operates as a corrective force that prevents belief from hardening into dogma. The Socratic assertion, "I know that I know nothing," captures the essence of this paradox. Socrates' claim was not a denial of all knowledge, but an acknowledgement of its provisional nature. For him, philosophical understanding arises from a disciplined recognition of ignorance, which creates the intellectual humility necessary for genuine inquiry. This orientation has persisted across the history of philosophy. Scientific revolutions, for instance, exemplify how discoveries dismantle older certainties and redefine what counts as knowledge. The Copernican and quantum shifts demonstrated that human frameworks for understanding are historically situated and incomplete. Each advance in understanding thus widens the horizon of what remains unexplained. The growth of knowledge is not linear accumulation, but recursive expansion. As one domain becomes clarified, adjacent uncertainties emerge. The awareness of ignorance is therefore a structural feature of epistemic progress rather than an obstacle to it. Accepting ignorance as an inherent aspect of knowing reframes the nature of wisdom. Instead of treating ignorance as failure, it can be viewed as the precondition for intellectual integrity. This perspective challenges the assumption that certainty is attainable or even desirable. Certainty can close inquiry by discouraging revision, while uncertainty sustains the capacity to question and refine beliefs. The paradox of knowing suggests that the pursuit of understanding must remain open-ended, responsive to evidence and reasoning rather than fixed conclusions. In this way, ignorance functions as an epistemic space rather than a void, a recognition that the boundaries of knowledge are flexible and continually shifting. To know, in the deepest sense, is to recognize the scale of what remains unknown and to approach that realization with humility and curiosity rather than fear. The Ship of Theseus. The Ship of Theseus is a classical philosophical thought experiment that examines the nature of identity and persistence through change. It begins with a simple image: a ship whose wooden planks are gradually replaced one by one until no original material remains. The question arises whether it is still the same ship or a different one entirely. The thought experiment forces consideration of what constitutes identity when every constituent element has been altered. If continuity depends on material composition, the ship ceases to be the same once a single plank is replaced. If identity resides in structure or function, then as long as the arrangement and purpose remain constant, the ship retains its identity. The tension between these two interpretations exposes the difficulty of defining sameness over time and challenges intuitive assumptions about persistence in both physical and abstract entities. The problem becomes more complex when applied to living beings. Human bodies continuously regenerate at the cellular level. Over the course of years, most biological components are replaced. Likewise, beliefs, memories, and dispositions evolve in response to experience and learning. Yet despite these transformations, individuals maintain a sense of continuous personal identity. This suggests that identity may not depend solely on material or psychological sameness, but on patterns of organization, causal continuity, or narrative coherence. Philosophers such as John Locke proposed that personal identity is grounded in memory, the capacity to recall past experiences as belonging to the same self. Later theorists argued that identity might be relational, emerging from the interconnected processes that constitute life and consciousness rather than from fixed essence or substance. The Ship of Theseus thus serves as a model for investigating how humans define persistence amid inevitable change. If both physical composition and mental content are transient, the sense of an enduring I may be a construct generated by the brain to maintain coherence in perception and action. The illusion of continuity might function as a psychological mechanism that enables stability within constant flux. Alternatively, identity could be viewed as a dynamic process rather than a fixed property, something continually reconstituted through memory, behavior, and social interaction. In either case, the Ship of Theseus reveals that identity is not a simple matter of possession or replacement, but an ongoing negotiation between change and continuity. The illusion of time. The concept of time occupies a central position in both philosophy and physics, yet its nature remains deeply uncertain. Human life is structured around the passage of time. We measure it, anticipate it, and remember it. However, time itself is never directly observed. What is perceived are events, motions, and changes from which the sense of time is inferred. This raises a fundamental question. Does time exist independently of the mind, or is it merely a framework imposed upon experience to make sense of sequence and transformation? Philosophers since antiquity have struggled to clarify whether time is an objective feature of reality or a subjective condition of consciousness. The question persists because time, though indispensable to thought and language, resists precise definition and empirical isolation. St. Augustine articulated one of the earliest and most influential reflections on this problem. He observed that while everyone seems to understand what time is, no one can explain it clearly. For Augustine, time did not exist independently of the mind. It was an aspect of the soul's capacity to remember the past, experience the present, and anticipate the future. Many centuries later, Einstein's theory of relativity reshaped the discussion by showing that time is not absolute, but relative to the observer's frame of reference. Time dilates and contracts depending on speed and gravity, implying that what one person experiences as simultaneous, another may not. This scientific discovery deepened rather than resolved the philosophical problem, suggesting that time may not be a flowing medium but a dimension interwoven with space into a single fabric of space-time. In this view, past, present, and future all coexist within a four-dimensional structure, and the flow of time is a product of human perception rather than an intrinsic feature of the universe. If the passage of time is an illusion created by consciousness, then the distinction between now, before, and after may be psychological rather than ontological. Existence would not unfold but simply be, with change arising from how awareness moves through fixed configurations of space-time. This challenges conventional understandings of causality, memory, and personal identity, all of which rely on temporal sequence. It also raises questions about mortality and permanence, suggesting that moments are not lost but persist eternally in different coordinates of the universal structure. The illusion of time, then, might be a necessary feature of human cognition, providing order to experience while concealing the timelessness of reality itself. The simulation hypothesis. The simulation hypothesis is a modern philosophical argument that examines the possibility that reality, as it is experienced, might be an artificial construct. Rather than existing within a fundamental physical universe, human beings could be part of a computational model designed and maintained by an advanced civilization. The idea extends beyond speculative fiction into serious academic discussion because it challenges basic assumptions about perception, consciousness, and existence. What appears as a stable, material world might instead be an intricate system of information processing, where the laws of physics represent rules within a programmed environment. The hypothesis raises fundamental epistemological questions about how one can distinguish between genuine and simulated reality when all evidence is itself part of the potential simulation. The contemporary formulation of the hypothesis originates from philosopher Nick Bostrom's 2003 paper, "Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?" Bostrom proposed a trilemma. Either civilizations never reach a level of technological maturity capable of creating realistic simulations of conscious beings, or such civilizations exist but choose not to run simulations, or they do run them, in which case simulated minds would vastly outnumber biological ones. If the third scenario holds, statistical reasoning suggests that it is more probable that any given conscious observer, including ourselves, exists within a simulation rather than a base-level reality. The argument does not claim that we are certainly simulated, but that the probability is significant enough to merit philosophical and scientific consideration. The hypothesis intersects with developments in computing, artificial intelligence, and theoretical physics, particularly in how these fields increasingly describe the universe in informational terms. The physical world, at its smallest scales, already behaves in discrete, quantized ways, resembling digital computation. If consciousness can emerge from a computational process, then the boundary between artificial and biological life becomes conceptually irrelevant. The questions of moral responsibility arise concerning both the potential creators of such simulations and the simulated beings themselves. Moreover, the hypothesis invites reconsideration of meaning and authenticity. If experiences, relationships, and emotions are simulated, they might still possess reality for the subjects who live them, since subjective experience constitutes the basis of what is considered real. The distinction between simulation and reality may therefore be less significant than the continuity of conscious awareness. Whether or not the universe is simulated, the inquiry itself underscores a deeper uncertainty, that knowledge of the ultimate nature of existence may be beyond verification, limited by the very framework within which all thought occurs. The mind-body problem. The mind-body problem concerns the relationship between mental phenomena and physical processes. It asks how subjective experience, thought, and awareness arise from, or relate to, the material structure of the body. This question has persisted throughout the history of philosophy and remains unresolved, largely because it confronts the limits of empirical explanation. The mind, as experienced from the first-person perspective, is characterized by qualities such as intention, perception, and feeling. The body, as examined from the third-person perspective, is an object of measurement and observation. The challenge lies in explaining how these two domains, subjective experience and objective matter, interact or correspond. The problem touches not only philosophy but also neuroscience, psychology, and artificial intelligence, as all attempt to define what consciousness is and where it originates. René Descartes' dualism provided one of the earliest systematic treatments of this issue. He argued that the mind and the body are distinct substances, residential cogitans, the realm of thinking, and residential extensa, the realm of extension in space. Descartes believed that while the body could be studied as a machine governed by physical laws, the mind possessed immaterial properties that could not be reduced to mechanical explanations. This distinction created a lasting framework for inquiry, but also introduced enduring difficulties. If the mind and body are fundamentally different substances, how can they interact causally? Later thinkers proposed alternatives, such as materialism, which reduces mental states to brain processes, and idealism, which interprets the physical world as dependent on consciousness. More recent approaches, such as emergentism and functionalism, attempt to bridge the gap by suggesting that consciousness arises from complex arrangements of matter or from the functions performed by neural systems. Despite these developments, no theory has conclusively explained how the experience of consciousness emerges from physical substrates. If consciousness cannot be fully reduced to material processes, this suggests that subjective experience may possess a dimension not captured by physical description. Some interpretations propose that consciousness might be a fundamental property of reality, rather than a byproduct of matter. Others suggest that the sense of embodiment, the feeling that the mind inhabits the body, is itself a cognitive construction necessary for coherent perception and action. This line of thought reverses the usual assumption, implying that the body might be a projection or interpretation within consciousness rather than its container. The unresolved nature of the problem underscores a broader limitation of current understanding, that the boundary between mind and matter may not be fixed but conceptual, reflecting the structure of human cognition rather than the structure of the world itself. Free will or the great illusion. The question of free will addresses whether human beings possess genuine control over their actions, or whether every decision is determined by prior causes. The notion of free will underlies moral responsibility, law, and personal identity, yet its validity has been repeatedly challenged by developments in philosophy and science. The problem arises from the apparent conflict between subjective experience and objective explanation. From the first-person perspective, individuals feel that they deliberate, weigh options, and choose freely. From the standpoint of physical science, however, every event, including mental activity, appears governed by causal laws. If the brain operates as a complex biological system subject to physical necessity, then each thought and choice may be the inevitable result of preceding conditions. This tension defines the modern debate. whether human freedom is real or a psychological construct emerging from deterministic processes. Empirical research in neuroscience has intensified this discussion. Experiments conducted by Benjamin Libet and later researchers found that brain activity predictive of a decision can be detected milliseconds before subjects report becoming conscious of having made that decision. These findings suggest that what is experienced as conscious choice might in fact be the post hoc awareness of a process already initiated by neural mechanisms. Subsequent studies have refined, but not overturned, this interpretation. Some scholars argue that consciousness still plays a regulatory role, allowing for veto or modification of unconscious impulses. Others contend that the sense of authorship is an adaptive illusion, maintaining coherence in behavior and self-conception. Philosophically, these results intersect with deterministic theories in which every mental event is causally necessitated, as well as with compatibilist positions that redefine free will not as the absence of causation but as the capacity to act according to one's reasons, even if those reasons are themselves determined. If free will is indeed illusory, the implications are significant for moral and social philosophy. Traditional systems of ethics and justice presuppose that individuals could have acted otherwise and are therefore accountable for their actions. The erosion of that assumption would require reinterpreting responsibility in terms of causation, rehabilitation, or prevention rather than blame or praise. On a personal level, the denial of free will challenges notions of agency and meaning, raising questions about motivation, purpose, and authenticity. Yet, even if choices arise from deterministic processes, the experience of deliberation remains central to human life. The recognition that decisions have antecedent causes does not necessarily render them meaningless. It may instead invite a deeper understanding of behavior as part of a continuous causal network in which reflection and awareness still play functional roles. The problem of other minds. The problem of other minds concerns the difficulty of establishing whether beings other than oneself possess conscious experience. Each individual has direct access only to their own sensations, thoughts, and awareness. While it is possible to observe the behavior of others, their speech, facial expressions, and actions, such observations provide only external indicators, not direct evidence of inner experience. This limitation leads to a fundamental epistemological problem. If consciousness is private and subjective, there appears to be no definitive way to confirm that other minds exist. The issue has been discussed throughout the history of philosophy because it exposes the gap between first-person knowledge, which is immediate and experiential, and third-person observation, which is inferential. It forces reconsideration of what it means to know and how far human cognition can reach beyond its own boundaries. Philosophers have approached the problem in several ways. The most skeptical position is solipsism, which maintains that only one's own mind can be known to exist, and that the external world, including other people, may be projections of consciousness. Few endorse this position as a practical worldview, but it illustrates the limits of empirical verification. More moderate perspectives appeal to analogy and inference. Because others behave as one does in similar circumstances, it is reasonable to infer that they, too, possess mental states. This argument, however, remains probabilistic rather than conclusive. In contemporary philosophy of mind, functionalist theories attempt to bypass the issue by defining consciousness in terms of behavior or information processing, thereby making the existence of other minds a matter of observable function rather than private experience. Yet such approaches do not resolve the underlying question of what consciousness is or how it can be shared. The problem persists even in discussions of artificial intelligence, where machines can convincingly simulate understanding without it being clear whether such simulation entails genuine awareness. If the existence of other minds cannot be proven, the recognition of others as conscious beings becomes an act of trust rather than knowledge. This trust forms the basis of empathy, communication, and moral responsibility. It also frames the experience of loneliness. Isolation arises not from the absence of others, but from the unbridgeable distance between minds. Even intimate relationships are mediated by interpretation, as one can never fully inhabit another's perspective. Some philosophers propose that this separation is not a defect, but a defining feature of consciousness, since self-awareness depends on the distinction between self and other. The problem of other minds, therefore, remains unresolved, not because it lacks a solution, but because it delineates the inherent structure of subjective experience, an awareness bounded by its own horizon, reaching toward but never completely merging with the consciousness of another. The paradox of choice. The paradox of choice examines the counterintuitive relationship between freedom and satisfaction. In modern societies, personal freedom is often equated with the ability to choose among multiple alternatives. Economic and political systems alike assume that expanding individual choice enhances well-being. However, psychological and behavioral research has indicated that beyond a certain threshold, an increase in available options does not lead to greater happiness, but instead to greater dissatisfaction and decision fatigue. This paradox arises because the process of choosing carries cognitive and emotional costs. When individuals are confronted with many possible outcomes, they must expend effort evaluating, comparing, and anticipating regret. The abundance of alternatives can generate a persistent sense that a better choice might exist, leading to uncertainty and diminished contentment even after a decision is made. Thus, freedom, which is intended to empower, can under certain conditions become a source of constraint. Barry Schwartz's influential work, The Paradox of Choice, 2004, synthesized empirical studies and philosophical arguments to show how excessive choice undermines well-being. He distinguished between two orientations toward choice: maximizing and satisficing. Maximizers seek the best possible option and therefore engage in exhaustive comparison, often accompanied by anxiety and self-doubt. Satisficers, by contrast, select an option that meets their criteria of adequacy and stop searching once that threshold is reached. The prevalence of maximizing behavior in contemporary consumer culture contributes to chronic dissatisfaction, as individuals measure success by the perceived quality of their choices. Each decision, however minor, becomes an implicit evaluation of one's competence, values, and identity. Moreover, the social dimension of choice amplifies this pressure. Public visibility and comparison, facilitated by technology and social media, create conditions in which personal decisions are continuously measured against those of others. The result is a cycle of aspiration, doubt, and regret that erodes the psychological benefits of freedom. The implications of the paradox extend beyond consumer behavior to questions about autonomy, contentment, and meaning. If unbounded choice can diminish happiness, then the highest form of freedom may not lie in having limitless possibilities, but in the ability to accept limits willingly. Philosophical and religious traditions have long suggested that peace arises from self-discipline, not indulgence, and that satisfaction depends less on external abundance than on internal clarity about one's needs and values. From this perspective, surrender does not imply resignation, but a deliberate simplification of life's decision structure. The paradox of choice, therefore, invites reflection on the structure of freedom itself. It suggests that fulfillment may depend on cultivating the capacity to choose with restraint, to recognize that meaning does not emerge from the quantity of alternatives, but from commitment to the choices one makes. The meaning of meaning. The question of what gives words their meaning lies at the foundation of the philosophy of language. Meaning appears to be an essential property of linguistic expression, yet its source and structure are difficult to define. Traditional theories attempted to ground meaning in correspondence, proposing that words acquire meaning by representing or referring to objects and facts in the world. Under this view, language functions as a mirror of reality. However, this framework encounters problems when words do not correspond directly to tangible objects, as in abstract concepts, emotions, or moral judgments. The challenge is to explain how language can generate shared understanding despite the absence of fixed references. This difficulty prompted philosophers in the 20th century, most notably Ludwig Wittgenstein, to reconceptualize meaning not as an intrinsic feature of words, but as a product of their practical use within social contexts. Wittgenstein's later philosophy, particularly in philosophical investigations, replaced the idea of language as a static system with the notion of language games. According to this view, the meaning of a word arises from the way it is employed within a particular form of life, a pattern of human activity governed by shared norms and purposes. Words do not possess inherent meaning independent of their use. Rather, they derive significance from their function within a linguistic and social practice. For example, the word bank has different meanings depending on whether it occurs in a financial conversation or a discussion about rivers. Meaning, therefore, is relational and situational, determined by the rules of the specific game being played. This approach dissolves many traditional philosophical problems about language by shifting the focus from abstract representation to pragmatic participation. Understanding becomes an act of alignment within a shared framework rather than the discovery of objective definitions. Purpose and significance might not be pre-existing entities waiting to be uncovered, but emergent properties of participation within a social and experiential context. Just as words acquire meaning through use, lives may acquire meaning through action, relation, and engagement. This perspective reframes the search for meaning from one of discovery to one of creation. It implies that coherence arises not from uncovering a hidden order, but from contributing to the ongoing practice of meaning-making that characterizes human life. In this way, the philosophy of language provides a model for understanding existence, Meaning is not found but lived, constituted through the very activities that express it. The trolley problem. The trolley problem presents a simple but enduring ethical puzzle. A runaway train is heading toward 5 people tied to a track. Nearby, a lever controls a switch that could divert the train onto another track where a single person stands. Pulling the lever would save the 5, but kill the 1. The scenario isolates a moral conflict between action and inaction, between taking responsibility for causing harm and allowing harm to occur through omission. Its simplicity is deliberate, removing emotional and contextual distractions to expose the structure of moral reasoning. The thought experiment does not seek a definitive answer, but compels reflection on how ethical choices are justified and whether morality is grounded in consequences, duties, or principles. Within moral philosophy, the trolley problem occupies a boundary between utilitarian and deontological frameworks. A utilitarian analysis evaluates actions according to their outcomes, favoring the option that minimizes harm or maximizes well-being. From this perspective, pulling the lever appears morally preferable because it saves more lives. In contrast, a deontological approach, associated with Immanuel Kant, emphasizes moral rules and intentions rather than results. According to this view, intentionally causing harm to an innocent person, even for a greater good, violates a moral duty and is therefore impermissible. The tension between these positions illustrates the difficulty of applying abstract ethical theories to concrete human decisions. Variations of the thought experiment, such as pushing a person onto the tracks to stop the train, further test the limits of moral intuition by altering the proximity of action and the degree of personal involvement. The persistence of discomfort in all versions suggests that moral judgment may be shaped as much by emotional and psychological factors as by rational calculation. Beyond its academic context, the trolley problem functions as a model for ethical reasoning in complex, real-world systems. Modern applications appear in discussions of autonomous vehicles, medical triage, and military decision-making, where choices often involve trade-offs between competing harms. Each case reaffirms that moral decision-making cannot be entirely automated or reduced to mathematical optimization. To decide is to interpret the value of human life, responsibility, and consequence within uncertain conditions. The metaphor of the lever thus extends beyond the rail line. Every ethical choice, however ordinary, involves a form of intervention that redefines what is preserved and what is lost. In this sense, the T-trolley problem endures because it mirrors the structure of moral life itself, an ongoing negotiation between what can be done, what should be done, and what one must live with afterward. The paradox of tolerance. Tolerance is often regarded as one of the defining virtues of open societies. It allows differing beliefs, behaviors, and worldviews to coexist without resorting to coercion or exclusion. Yet this very ideal contains an internal contradiction that becomes evident when tolerance is extended to those who reject it. The paradox of tolerance arises when a society's commitment to openness enables the rise of intolerant movements that, if left unchecked, would dismantle the very freedoms that made their expression possible. The question is not merely theoretical, It speaks to the fragility of pluralism and to the limits of moral and political permissiveness. A society that tolerates everything indiscriminately risks creating conditions in which intolerance gains legitimacy and power, ultimately eroding the foundation of tolerance itself. Karl Popper articulated this problem in The Open Society and Its Enemies, 1945, arguing that tolerance must not be absolute. His position was not an endorsement of repression, but a recognition of a logical boundary. If all ideas and practices are tolerated equally, those that promote violence or the suppression of others will exploit this permissiveness to eliminate opposition. In that sense, unlimited tolerance is self-defeating. Popper proposed that a liberal society must reserve the right to defend itself against those who would use freedom to abolish freedom. The challenge lies in identifying the point at which protection becomes suppression and when restricting intolerance becomes itself an act of intolerance. This balance is not easily maintained because it requires a constant negotiation between principle and pragmatism. Laws, norms, and social discourse must adapt to prevent destructive ideologies from taking root while preserving the broadest possible space for disagreement and dissent. The paradox of tolerance continues to have practical implications in contemporary political and cultural contexts. Digital communication amplifies both expression and extremism, making it increasingly difficult to distinguish between legitimate criticism and speech that seeks to undermine democratic values. The question of where to draw boundaries between tolerance and defense becomes a recurring ethical and institutional dilemma. A functional society may require not the absence of exclusion, but the selective exclusion of those who reject coexistence itself. The goal is not to impose uniformity, but to sustain the conditions under which diversity can persist. In this sense, closing certain doors is not a betrayal of openness, but an act that preserves its possibility. The paradox of tolerance thus reminds us that freedom is not a static condition, but a structure that must be maintained through deliberate and sometimes uncomfortable restraint. The Experience Machine. The Experience Machine is a philosophical thought experiment introduced by Robert Nozick in Anarchy, State, and Utopia, 1974. It asks a deceptively simple question. If you could live a life of unbroken pleasure by connecting to a machine that simulates perfect experiences, would you choose to do so? The machine would generate sensations and memories indistinguishable from real life. You would believe you were achieving goals, feeling love, and experiencing fulfillment, even though none of it would exist outside the simulation. Nozick's aim was not to suggest such a machine should be built, but to challenge hedonism, the view that pleasure is the highest or only intrinsic good. By inviting us to imagine a world where pleasure is guaranteed, the thought experiment forces reflection on whether pleasure alone could ever constitute a meaningful life. Nozick argued that most people, when presented with this choice, would hesitate to plug in. The hesitation reveals something fundamental about human values. People seem to want more than pleasurable sensations. They want their experiences to be real, to be connected to something beyond mere perception. The thought experiment distinguishes between feeling good and being good, suggesting that authenticity and engagement with reality possess intrinsic worth independent of pleasure. The Experience Machine also exposes an implicit desire for agency. Within the simulation, One's actions have no genuine effect, and accomplishments have no correspondence to external reality. This absence of causal connection diminishes the sense of self as an active participant in the world. From a psychological and existential standpoint, meaning appears to arise not from the quality of experience alone, but from the awareness that one's actions exist within an independent and shared reality. The experience machine raises the question of whether technological perfection might satisfy desires while eroding the conditions that make those desires intelligible. If happiness can be artificially maintained, does it still hold ethical or existential value? The thought experiment implies that discomfort, limitation, and uncertainty are not defects to be eliminated but essential features of a life grounded in reality. Meaning, in this view, cannot be manufactured through pleasure alone because it depends on a reciprocal relationship between self and world. Contact with reality, however imperfect, affirms the authenticity of experience in a way that comfort within illusion cannot. The grandfather paradox. The grandfather paradox is one of the most well-known problems in the philosophy of time travel. It begins with a hypothetical scenario. A person travels back in time and performs an action that prevents their own existence, such as stopping their grandfather from meeting their grandmother. If the time traveler succeeds, their own birth would never occur, which would mean they could not have traveled back in time in the first place. Yet if they never traveled back, the event that prevented their birth would not have occurred, restoring the original timeline. This logical contradiction challenges the coherence of backward time travel by revealing how causal relationships collapse when effects interfere with their own causes. The paradox does not simply concern science fiction. It exposes the deep conceptual difficulties in reconciling temporal sequence, identity, and causation within any model that allows events to influence their own conditions of possibility. Philosophers and physicists have offered different interpretations to address the paradox. One response holds that time travel to the past is impossible because it would entail a logical contradiction, and therefore, the laws of nature must forbid it. Another view, often called the self-consistency principle, maintains that time travel could occur but only in ways that preserve causal consistency. According to this view, a traveler might go back in time, but any actions they take would already be part of history, ensuring that events unfold in a manner that prevents paradox. This idea implies that free will within a time travel scenario is limited. One cannot act in ways that would alter facts. A third interpretation, grounded in quantum physics and multiverse theory, suggests that changes to the past might generate branching timelines rather than contradictions. In that case, altering the past would not erase the traveler's existence, but instead create a divergent reality in which different events occur. Each of these interpretations seeks to preserve logical coherence while acknowledging that our intuitive understanding of causality may not apply uniformly across temporal dimensions. Beyond its theoretical implications, the grandfather paradox invites reflection on the nature of time itself. The linear conception of time, in which events progress from past to future in a single, unidirectional sequence, may be insufficient to describe the complexity of temporal relations. The paradox suggests that time could be structured as a loop, a network, or a field in which cause and effect are mutually dependent rather than sequential. In this framework, the notion of erasing or rewriting the past becomes less meaningful, since every event exists as part of an interconnected totality that sustains itself. The infinite regress. The problem of infinite regress concerns the search for ultimate explanations. When one asks why something exists or what caused a particular event, the answer typically leads to another question. What caused that cause? This sequence extends indefinitely unless a stopping point is introduced. Philosophers and theologians have long recognized the difficulty this creates for any theory that seeks a foundational cause or principle. If every effect must have a prior cause, then the chain of causation can never begin, implying that existence itself would be impossible. Yet if there is a first cause that is not caused by anything else, one must explain how such an uncaused cause could exist. The infinite regress problem thus exposes the tension between the human demand for explanation and the logical consequences of that demand, revealing a boundary in rational inquiry where reasoning begins to turn back upon itself. In cosmology, the regress problem appears in debates about the origin of the universe. The Big Bang Theory provides a model for the early development of the cosmos, but it does not address what, if anything, preceded it. To ask what caused the Big Bang is to reintroduce the chain of causation that the theory cannot terminate. Similarly, in theology, the concept of a divine creator is often invoked as the first cause or unmoved mover, as in Aristotle's and Aquinas' formulations. However, the question immediately arises: what accounts for the existence of that first cause? If the answer is that it is self-existent or necessary, the reasoning shifts from empirical explanation to metaphysical assertion. Some philosophers argue that an infinite regress of causes, while conceptually unsettling, may be no more problematic than the idea of a first cause existing without origin. Others propose that causation itself may not apply at the most fundamental level of reality, suggesting that the demand for a cause reflects human cognitive habits rather than the structure of existence. In either case, the regress problem challenges the assumption that every question must yield an ultimate answer. Contemplating the infinite regress invites reconsideration of how explanation functions in both science and philosophy. The impulse to find a final cause or foundation may reflect a desire for closure rather than a necessity of logic. Infinity, in this context, represents not an error to correct, but a feature of reasoning that mirrors the open-endedness of reality. To accept infinite regress is to acknowledge that understanding might be inherently provisional and that explanation can always extend further without exhaustion. This perspective reframes the search for origins as a continuous inquiry rather than a quest for finality. Instead of seeking the first cause as a discrete event or being, one might view causation as a structure without a beginning, where every point is both origin and consequence. In that sense, the infinite regress does not signify failure, but the recognition that explanation, like existence, has no ultimate boundary. The veil of perception. The veil of perception refers to the idea that human beings do not perceive the external world directly, but only through representations shaped by the senses and the mind. Every visual, auditory, or tactile experience is mediated by physiological processes and cognitive interpretation. When one sees a tree, for instance, what reaches awareness is not the tree itself, but light reflected from it, processed by the eyes, and reconstructed by the brain into a coherent image. The perception feels immediate and accurate, yet it is always a translation. This raises a central philosophical question. If experience is filtered through subjective mechanisms, how can one be sure that what is perceived corresponds to what actually exists? The veil of perception thus marks the boundary between appearance and reality, suggesting that the world as experienced might differ fundamentally from the world as it is. Philosophers have approached this problem from different perspectives. John Locke argued that perception involves primary and secondary qualities. Primary qualities, such as shape and motion, exist in objects independently of observation, while secondary qualities, such as color and sound, arise from the interaction between objects and the perceiver. Immanuel Kant expanded this idea by proposing that the mind actively structures experience through innate categories such as space, time, and causality. According to Kant, we can never know the thing in itself, the world as it exists independently of perception, because all experience is organized by these mental frameworks. Reality, in this sense, is always filtered and shaped by the conditions of human cognition. Later philosophers and cognitive scientists have continued to explore this insight, showing that perception is an interpretive process influenced by expectations, memory, and language. The world that appears to us is therefore a constructed model, continuously updated but never fully transparent to the underlying reality it represents. Truth may not consist in direct correspondence between thought and reality, but in the coherence and reliability of the models we construct. Scientific knowledge, for example, can be understood as a progressive refinement of these models rather than a literal revelation of things as they are. On a more existential level, the veil of perception suggests that human experience is confined to a domain of appearances, yet this limitation also defines the scope of meaning and understanding. Rather than seeking to escape the veil, one might accept it as the necessary condition for knowledge itself. The recognition that perception filters reality does not negate truth, but situates it within the human context, a truth that exists not beyond perception, but through it. Language occupies a central position in human thought, serving as the primary means through which reality is described, analyzed, and shared. Yet its adequacy as a medium of truth has long been questioned. To speak or write about the world is to translate experience into symbolic form, and in this translation, something is inevitably altered or lost. The concept known as the shipwreck of language reflects this persistent problem. The recognition that linguistic expression may fail to convey the fullness of what it seeks to represent. Words operate as signs, pointing toward meaning but never coinciding with it. They depend on conventions, histories, and shared assumptions that shape interpretation in ways that may diverge from the realities they attempt to capture. What is said, therefore, always carries an element of incompleteness, as if language is a vessel adrift on the surface of reality's vast and shifting sea. The skepticism toward language has deep philosophical roots. Friedrich Nietzsche argued that language imposes categories and distinctions upon a world that is fluid and indeterminate, turning dynamic processes into fixed entities. For him, every word is already a simplification, a metaphor that conceals as much as it reveals. Later, Jacques Derrida expanded this critique by introducing the concept of difference, the idea that meaning in language is always deferred, never fully present. Words gain significance only in relation to other words, forming an endless chain of references without ultimate grounding. The implication is that linguistic systems create meaning internally rather than discovering it externally. Language becomes a structure that generates its own reality, distinct from the world it attempts to describe. This insight challenges the traditional assumption that language serves as a transparent window to truth. Instead, it functions as an interpretive framework, producing versions of reality rather than direct access to it. If language cannot fully correspond to reality, the question arises of what, if anything, lies beyond linguistic mediation. Some philosophers and mystics have suggested that silence offers a form of knowledge that language cannot achieve. Silence, in this sense, is not mere absence of speech, but a recognition of the limits of expression. It acknowledges that certain dimensions of experience, emotional, aesthetic, or metaphysical, may resist conceptual capture. However, even silence can be interpreted and therefore cannot escape meaning entirely. The shipwreck of language thus marks not the failure of communication, but the awareness of its boundaries. To think within language is to navigate between precision and distortion, between expression and ambiguity. Recognizing this tension does not diminish the value of speech, but invites humility about its scope, reminding us that every statement about the world remains, in part, an approximation. The absurd. The concept of the absurd arises from a basic conflict between two aspects of human existence: the persistent desire to find meaning and the apparent indifference of the universe to that desire. Human beings are rational creatures who seek coherence, purpose, and moral order, yet the world provides no clear answers to these demands. This confrontation between expectation and silence is what Albert Camus identified as the absurd. It is not simply a state of confusion or disappointment, but a fundamental condition of consciousness. To be aware of the absurd is to recognize that the universe offers no ultimate explanation for human striving, and yet that striving continues. The absurd, therefore, does not emerge from the world alone, but from the interaction between human reason and the world's lack of response. In The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus developed this idea into a philosophical position that neither denies meaning nor claims to find it. For Camus, the absurd cannot be resolved through appeal to religion, metaphysics, or transcendence, because such attempts to impose meaning on an indifferent universe constitute a kind of philosophical escape. The awareness of meaninglessness is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be confronted. Sisyphus, condemned to roll a boulder up a hill only to watch it roll back down again, embodies the human condition. His labor is futile, yet he continues, and in that continuation lies his defiance. Camus argued that the recognition of the absurd demands neither resignation nor suicide, but lucid acceptance. To live without appeal, to acknowledge the absence of ultimate meaning while remaining fully engaged with life, is the essence of his philosophy of revolt. It is a stance that transforms futility into freedom, for once no higher purpose can be expected, every moment becomes its own justification. The absurd individual lives without illusions but not without purpose. Purpose arises from the act of living itself. This does not make existence trivial, but redefines its value in terms of immediacy and choice. In accepting the absurd, one affirms life not because it is meaningful, but because it is one's own. The revolt that Camus describes is neither grand nor heroic, but steady and deliberate, a commitment to continue despite the lack of guarantees. Within this framework, meaning becomes not a property of the universe, but a human practice, continually enacted against the background of indifference. The paradox of self. The concept of the self has been central to philosophical, religious, and scientific inquiry, yet it remains one of the most elusive subjects to define. The word I appears simple, but its reference is ambiguous. It seems to indicate a stable, enduring subject that perceives, decides, and acts, yet upon examination, this stability begins to dissolve. The paradox of self arises from the tension between lived experience, which presents the self as continuous and unified, and analytical observation, which reveals it as composite and impermanent. Each moment of awareness contains perceptions, emotions, and memories that differ from the last, yet the mind constructs a sense of coherence from this flux. This synthesis creates the impression of a singular entity where, in fact, there is only an ongoing process of change. The question of who or what speaks when one says I exposes a fundamental uncertainty about identity, agency, and existence. Philosophical traditions have approached this problem in distinct ways. In Buddhist thought, the doctrine of anatta denies the existence of a permanent self. According to this view, what is conventionally called the self is a collection of physical and mental processes, sensations, thoughts, and volitions, arising and passing in causal sequence. The belief in an independent self is considered a form of ignorance that gives rise to attachment and suffering. Contemporary neuroscience, though developed in a different intellectual context, has reached compatible conclusions. Empirical studies of the brain suggest that consciousness is not localized in a single center but distributed across various neural systems. The sense of I emerges from the coordination of these processes rather than from an underlying entity. Memory, perception, and language combine to produce a narrative continuity that allows for personal identity and social interaction, but this continuity is a construction rather than a substance. The self, from this perspective, is not something that exists independently, but something that is continually generated. The absence of a permanent self does not necessarily imply emptiness or nihilism. Instead, it may point toward a more dynamic and relational understanding of existence, in which identity is defined by interdependence rather than isolation. The realization that the self is a process rather than an object alters the way one conceives of suffering, mortality, and meaning. To ask who suffers or who dies may be to ask the wrong question, for what persists is not a self, but the ongoing pattern of causes and conditions that give rise to experience. The paradox of self thus challenges the assumption that individuality is a foundation of reality, suggesting instead that it is a function of perception, a necessary illusion that both enables and limits human understanding. The observer effect. The observer effect describes a fundamental tension between measurement and reality. The recognition that the act of observation is not neutral but participatory. This idea appears in many domains, but it has particular significance in quantum mechanics, where the behavior of particles seems to depend on whether or not they're being observed. Experiments such as the double-slit experiment reveal that particles like electrons can exist in a state of superposition, occupying multiple potential positions simultaneously until measurement forces them into a definite state. Observation, in this context, does not merely record an outcome, but appears to play a role in producing it. The phenomenon challenges classical assumptions about an objective world existing independently of perception and raises questions about the relationship between consciousness, information, and the physical structure of the universe. What it means to observe, and whether observation itself is a physical or cognitive process, remains at the center of this ongoing debate. In the history of physics, the observer effect emerged as a conceptual problem rather than a metaphysical claim. Early quantum theorists, including Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg, proposed that the act of measurement necessarily disturbs the system being measured, making it impossible to separate the observer from the observed. Bohr's principle of complementarity emphasized that the properties of particles depend on the experimental setup, meaning that what is measured is inseparable from how it is measured. Later interpretations, such as the Copenhagen interpretation, held that quantum systems do not possess definite properties until they are observed. This view led to the provocative idea that reality itself may be indeterminate in the absence of observation. However, alternative models, including decoherence theory and the many worlds interpretation, have attempted to explain these results without invoking consciousness directly. They suggest that the act of observation can be understood as a physical interaction, not a mental one. Nonetheless, the role of the observer continues to raise philosophical questions that transcend empirical explanation. The broader implications of the observer effect extend beyond physics into epistemology and metaphysics. If observation changes what is observed, then knowledge is never entirely detached from the process of knowing. Every act of perception or measurement becomes a form of participation in the reality being studied. This interdependence blurs the distinction between subject and object, implying that the structure of reality may include the observer as an integral component. Whether or not consciousness plays a direct causal role in shaping physical events, the observer effect suggests that understanding cannot be separated from involvement. It presents a model of reality in which existence and awareness are not isolated but mutually defining. To observe, then, is not merely to witness, but to take part in the continual unfolding of what is real. The Great Filter. The Great Filter is a hypothesis proposed to explain a troubling discrepancy between expectation and observation. Given the vastness of the universe, its age, and the apparent abundance of potentially habitable planets, it would seem statistically inevitable that intelligent life should have arisen many times beyond Earth. Yet, despite decades of searching, no definitive evidence of extraterrestrial civilizations has been found. This absence is often referred to as the Fermi paradox, named after physicist Enrico Fermi's famous question, "Where is everybody?" The Great Filter offers one possible answer. It posits that somewhere along the evolutionary trajectory from simple matter to advanced technological life lies a barrier, an event, process, or tendency so destructive or improbable that it prevents civilizations from surviving long enough to expand across the stars. This filter could exist behind us, meaning humanity has already passed the most difficult stage of development, or ahead of us, suggesting our eventual self-destruction is nearly certain. The hypothesis encompasses a wide range of possibilities, from the rarity of life's emergence to the inevitability of extinction through self-inflicted catastrophe. Some scientists propose that the filter may lie in the origin of life itself, an event that could be extraordinarily uncommon despite the universe's size. Others argue that the true obstacle emerges later, when intelligent species develop the capacity for large-scale destruction before they achieve interstellar resilience. Nuclear war, ecological collapse, artificial intelligence misalignment, or uncontrolled technological acceleration could serve as manifestations of this filter. The absence of detectable civilizations, no signals, no megastructures, no colonized galaxies, might therefore reflect a universal tendency towards self-termination. From this perspective, technological advancement is not merely progress but risk, and the silence of the cosmos could be interpreted as a warning rather than a mystery. The Great Filter reframes the question of extraterrestrial life as a question about survival itself. What does it take for intelligence to persist rather than to annihilate its own conditions of existence? If the filter lies ahead of us, humanity's current moment occupies an uncertain position in cosmic history. We might be one of countless species approaching the same threshold, unaware of how close we are to crossing it. The discovery of even simple life elsewhere would be ambiguous. It would confirm that life is not rare, but would also suggest that few forms of life progress much further. Conversely, if the filter is already behind us, if the emergence of complex, intelligent beings capable of self-reflection is the improbable step, then humanity may represent an exception rather than a precursor. Either outcome forces reconsideration of our significance. The Great Filter is not only a hypothesis about extraterrestrial life, but also a mirror reflecting the precariousness of our own existence. To ask where everyone is may also be to ask how long any intelligent being can endure in a universe that offers no guarantees of survival. The moral luck problem. The concept of moral luck challenges one of the most basic assumptions in ethics, that individuals can only be held morally responsible for actions under their control. In everyday moral judgment, praise and blame are distributed according to perceived intent and outcome. Yet, upon closer examination, both of these dimensions are shaped by factors that lie beyond a person's deliberate choice. Philosopher Thomas Nagel, among others, highlighted this paradox, observing that even our capacity for reasoning, emotional disposition, and sense of right and wrong are influenced by circumstances of birth, culture, and chance. The question then arises, if so much of moral behavior depends on elements we do not determine, to what extent can responsibility remain meaningful? The idea of moral luck thus exposes a fundamental tension between the fairness we demand in moral evaluation and the reality of how human life unfolds. Different kinds of moral luck illustrate how contingency permeates moral judgment. There is constitutive luck, referring to the traits, temperaments, and tendencies that shape character from the start. There is circumstantial luck, concerning the situations one happens to encounter, which determine whether moral principles are ever tested. Finally, there is resultant luck, which refers to the unpredictable outcomes of actions, even when intentions are sound. A driver who causes harm in an accident due to chance weather conditions faces far greater moral scrutiny than one who drives under identical conditions without incident. The difference lies not in will, but in circumstance. In recognizing this, moral evaluation begins to appear uneven, as if human responsibility is judged through a framework that cannot account for luck's pervasive influence. Philosophical theories attempt to reconcile this inconsistency, but none have fully resolved it. To deny luck's role seems to distort the facts of experience, yet to accept it fully risks dissolving responsibility altogether. Legal systems rely on the notion of individual accountability, but they operate within societies structured by unequal distributions of opportunity and risk. If luck determines not only action but also character and circumstance, then blame and praise may be expressions of social necessity rather than moral truth. On a personal level, awareness of moral luck invites humility rather than fatalism. It suggests that ethical living requires acknowledgement of contingency, the recognition that moral standing depends as much on fortune as on will. Rather than eliminating responsibility, this awareness may refine it, directing attention toward empathy and structural understanding rather than moral certainty. In this light, the problem of moral luck becomes less a refutation of ethics than a reminder of its limits, revealing that moral judgment, like human life itself, is always entangled with chance. The Boltzmann Brain. The Boltzmann Brain is a thought experiment that arises from the intersection of cosmology, thermodynamics, and philosophy of mind. It was first proposed in relation to the ideas of Ludwig Boltzmann, a 19th century physicist who sought to explain the order of the universe through probabilistic reasoning. In a universe governed by entropy, the gradual tendency toward disorder, local fluctuations occasionally produce temporary pockets of order. Over infinite time, such fluctuations could, in theory, generate not only stars and galaxies, but even self-aware entities capable of conscious experience. A Boltzmann brain, therefore, is a hypothetical observer that materializes spontaneously from random matter and energy, complete with fabricated memories, perceptions, and a sense of continuity. From a statistical standpoint, such brains might actually be more probable than the existence of an entire structured universe like our own, since creating a single mind through random chance would require less energy and organization than sustaining a vast cosmic system. The paradox of the Boltzmann brain lies in its implications for how we understand reality and observation. If the spontaneous formation of conscious observers is more likely than the formation of an entire universe that contains them, then our confidence in being ordinary physical beings within a long-evolving cosmos becomes questionable. The thought experiment suggests that our experience of the world could be nothing more than a transient, self-consistent hallucination occurring within a chaotic, high-entropy background. In this scenario, the memories we rely on, the physical laws we believe in, and the passage of time we perceive would be illusions with no correspondence to an external history. Cosmologists use the Boltzmann Brain argument not as a literal claim, but as a measure of coherence for cosmological models. Any theory that predicts a universe dominated by spontaneously generated observers rather than evolved ones is seen as problematic because it undermines the reliability of observation itself. A theory that implies we are likely Boltzmann brains effectively destroys its own basis for being believed. Beyond physics, the Boltzmann brain challenges the relationship between perception, probability, and reality. It calls into question whether consciousness requires an external world or whether it could exist in isolation, constructing its own internal simulation. This line of thought converges with long-standing philosophical skepticism about the possibility of certain knowledge. If one cannot distinguish between veridical experience and illusion, the distinction between dreamer and dream collapses. The Boltzmann brain, therefore, functions as a boundary concept that exposes the limits of both empirical verification and metaphysical certainty. It reminds us that theories of the universe inevitably depend on assumptions about the reliability of the observer, and that the act of knowing itself is inseparable from the conditions that make knowledge possible. The omega point. The idea of the omega point originates from the work of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a French Jesuit priest, paleontologist, and philosopher who sought to reconcile evolutionary science with theological thought. He proposed that the universe is not merely expanding in physical complexity, but also developing toward increasing consciousness and unity. In his framework, evolution possesses a directional quality, moving from inanimate matter to life, from life to mind, and ultimately from individual minds toward a collective consciousness. Teilhard referred to the culmination of this process as the omega point, a state in which all individual awareness converges into a single, unified field of understanding. Unlike traditional theological concepts of an external creator or an end-time apocalypse, the omega point represents an imminent goal built into the fabric of the cosmos itself. Evolution, under this view, is not accidental but teleological, pointing toward a final synthesis of matter, life, and spirit. In the decades since Teilhard's writings, the omega point has inspired interpretations that range from metaphysical speculation to scientific hypothesis. Some cosmologists, such as Frank Tipler, have attempted to reinterpret the idea within a physicalist framework, suggesting that the future of intelligent life could involve technological advancement so profound that it allows consciousness to permeate the universe. Through this perspective, the omega point might correspond to a hypothetical stage where computational or informational processes approach infinite complexity as the universe nears thermodynamic collapse. Others have treated Teilhard's idea more metaphorically, as an expression of the human tendency to search for coherence within an otherwise indifferent cosmos. The notion that evolution has a purpose provides an alternative to purely mechanistic explanations of life and mind. It suggests that the rise of intelligence is not a coincidental anomaly, but part of a larger, self-organizing trajectory embedded in the structure of reality. Whether interpreted spiritually or scientifically, the concept challenges the assumption that consciousness is a local phenomenon, proposing instead that it may be a cosmic property in the process of becoming fully aware of itself. The development of knowledge, empathy, and cooperation would not be accidental social tendencies, but reflections of the universe's own movement toward integration. Conversely, if the omega point is only a projection of human hope, it nevertheless reveals the depth of that hope, the need to find direction in an evolutionary narrative that might otherwise appear aimless. In either case, the idea confronts humanity with a choice about how to understand its role in cosmic history. Whether or not consciousness truly converges at the end of time, the omega point remains a conceptual horizon, suggesting that evolution's ultimate mystery may lie not in the expansion of matter, but in the awakening of mind. The quiet question. The question of why there is something rather than nothing stands as one of the most profound inquiries in both philosophy and metaphysics. It resists simple formulation because it does not concern any particular thing or cause, but the very existence of existence itself. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz called it the first question which should rightly be asked, noting that even if one explains the formation of stars, life, and consciousness, one has not yet explained why there is anything at all to explain. Scientific investigation can trace the history of the universe back to its earliest measurable moments, but even the Big Bang presupposes the existence of conditions under which it occurred. The question reaches beyond empirical boundaries into the territory of ultimate contingency. To ask why there is something rather than nothing is to confront the limits of explanation, where reason must pause before a fact that appears both self-evident and inexplicable. Responses to the question have varied across philosophical and theological traditions, yet none have achieved finality. Some argue that existence is a brute fact requiring no further justification, that it simply is, and that asking why presumes an unwarranted expectation of reason within an indifferent cosmos. Others posit a necessary being or principle, a metaphysical ground that exists by its own nature and thus accounts for everything else. In this view, reality cannot arise from nothing, so something eternal must underlie it. Contemporary cosmology has introduced new formulations, suggesting that universes might emerge from quantum fluctuations or that nothing itself may not be a true void but a state of potentiality governed by physical laws. Yet each of these answers merely relocates the question rather than resolves it. Whether the explanation is theological, metaphysical, or scientific, one is left to ask why that underlying condition exists at all. The inquiry thus seems to turn back on itself, revealing the limits of human understanding when confronted with the possibility that existence may be both contingent and necessary in ways that language cannot reconcile. Confronting this question often produces not an answer, but a shift in perspective. It invites reflection on the nature of inquiry itself, on whether the need for explanation is a feature of the universe, or of the mind that contemplates it. Perhaps the question's persistence points to an aspect of consciousness that cannot tolerate pure absence, a cognitive drive that fills even the void with thought. In that sense, the silence surrounding the question becomes part of its meaning. To think about why there is something rather than nothing may not be to seek an answer, but to recognize that existence, by its very presence, transcends the categories we use to understand it. What remains after reasoning has reached its boundary is not knowledge but awareness, a quiet acknowledgement that being itself is the first and final mystery.